All right, here we go. Today is Sunday, July 15th, 2018, and this is episode 222 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good afternoon, Jerry. How are you, sir?
I am so good it hurts. How are you?
Wow. I'm doing pretty well. I wouldn't say that I'm causing myself pain, but I'm doing pretty well.
Good. Good to hear.
Yeah. It's Monday's coming at me quick, though.
I know. And by the way, just to follow up from our last show, I don't think we've fully settled on how we're going to distribute the prizes yet. So
that is a true statement.
We will get back to you shortly on that.
Yeah. So for those who are curious, we do have a free training class that I won at a B-Sides Atlanta show, and we want to give that out to a worthy listener. Though we were asking for ideas of how to give it away because we didn't have any, and honestly didn't get too many that were
just a few
viable yet. So we're hoping, hey, if you've got an idea of how to give away a good training, an InfoSec training class. In the U.S., probably. Apparently, there's some legal issues if we try to do this overseas. Let us know.
Yeah.
We're just trying to find a good, equitable, fair, nice way to do this so somebody gets a cool class and learns something and advances their career.
And I have 2 DerbyCon tickets to give away, too.
Wow.
I know, right?
That makes my giveaway pretty silly.
Nah.
So how are we giving those away?
Well, if we find some good ideas, right? But we'll do the same thing. Yeah,
that's fair.
Well, it'll be a package, right? But we'll use the same concept, whatever we come up with. So
fair enough.
Anyhow, so let's get on with the show here. So just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employers. Also, a big continued thank you to our Patreon donors. And
absolutely. You guys are awesome. Sorry, my mute was stuck.
Nope.
You Patreon donors continually amaze me. I am humbled by your support.
Yes.
Thank you.
This show, by the way, takes what I'll describe as an extreme amount of bandwidth these days. So
humble brag.
Yeah. I'm sure it's probably just scripts downloading over and over again, but
we could choose a better compression algorithm, maybe.
Maybe so. Yes.
I know computers are tough, but
they are. I'm just going to start delivering them as zip files, and you have to decompress them on your phone. All right. So getting into our stories, the first one comes from CSO Online, and the title here is really long. 4 reasons why CISOs must think like developers to build cybersecurity platforms and stop investing in silver bullets. So this is actually an opinion piece rather than a story, but I thought it was pretty spot on. If you start thinking about where the IT industry is going, at least spot on from my perspective, at least. In terms of automation and microservices and whatnot. So I hadn't really seen a lot of discussion about this specific to the realm of security. So I thought it was a good topic of conversation.
So what is it you think that, as we get into the story, what are the problems do you think this solves as we go through this story?
Well, so he talks about the four specific problems that he believes this solves. I will tell you, I think my view is it's kind of aligned with what he has, but I think there's other things that this solves as well, like scalability and resiliency, the ability to return to service quickly, kind of nimbleness, right? So the ability to deploy new security stuff quickly. So in any event, let's run through the list and then we'll get back into that discussion.
Yeah.
So again, the author here points out 4 specific problems that need to be addressed, and as he says, can be addressed by thinking more like developers. And the first one is that we're drowning in a cyber security data deluge, and he points out that we have all of these different tools like antivirus and DLP and firewalls and vulnerability scans and operating system logs and on and on and on and on. And we really can't, there's just so much of it that we really can't do anything meaningful with it on their own. And then he points out, number 2, that there's this data balkanization. So, he points out that we keep buying silver bullet tools. And I think the actually politically correct word instead of silver bullet is best of breed.
Blinky boxes.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it's best of breed. So yeah, we're always implementing or constantly implementing these technologies, these blinky boxes to solve specific problems. And none of them talk to each other, and they all have their own reports. And you really can't, again, do much useful with those. And then, moving on, he points out, and this is maybe to the point I was trying to make, we need to move from discrete security events to continuous security. And he points out that, in the past, we would, from a security perspective, kind of follow the waterfall method. We would design some security environment, we would implement it, and then we would put it into monitor mode, and that was the way it was. And akin to the way we're moving in IT operations and IT development, it's more of a continuous development, continuous iteration cycle of managing your security. So rather than just deploying some particular tool, you have a continuous security cycle. And
I have a lot of thoughts and questions on that one, so
right.
Let's circle back after we finish. Yeah.
Sure. He used the word security as code, and if you're not familiar with some of the DevOps and cloud-based concepts, you'll be familiar with infrastructure as code. And I really think that security in his, and again, I don't know what was in his mind as he wrote that, but to me it seems like this is just an offshoot of the whole infrastructure as code paradigm, right? It's just infrastructure that's intended for security purposes implemented as code. So, and then finally, we have this reactive and passive posture, which is becoming increasingly untenable. We can't, we can't, especially in the world of things like GDPR and increasing regulatory oversight. We have to be more proactive and shut things down sooner. It's no longer palatable to be the security guard responding to a burglar alarm. So yeah, those were his the problems that he sees that we're trying to solve. And now I think to be honest, I think he's being a little myopic in kind of hammering the whole point about, well, everything needs to be microservices based. And
so that's a buzzword, but how would that function in the real world? I mean, what do we mean by microservices based? I mean, what would that look like?
Well, I think the point is that you in an ideal world, and I don't think we're here yet, and I think it's a little naive to think that you can go to your antivirus company and your DLP provider and say, I want you to expose APIs that I can call. I mean, maybe they will someday, but I think that's a long way off.
So is the concept I can take various different modules from my various different InfoSec tools and be able to interact with those discrete modules as opposed to the monolithic commercial off the shelf entity that I'm typically used to interacting with.
Correct. You're combining these tools to do something that I would say is kind of greater than the sum of parts by being able to, interconnect them in ways that are meaningful to you.
So I know that he goes into more sort of solutions of how to do this in the article. We could certainly get into that as well. But as I'm reading this, the first part of this really reminds me of the marketing value or the value that was marketed of SIMS back in the day and still today of, pull all your data into one centralized system that can analyze and combine and show you correlation between and perhaps take action. We're seeing some automation tools out there that are trying to do this, but I still see a huge. I'm not disagreeing with his view. I'm having trouble because I don't think our technology and our vendor community is anywhere near this. The only real, integration or this sort of stuff that we typically see is perhaps with some industry leading SIMs from a market cap standpoint and within their own infrastructure and ecosystem of a particular vendor. This seems like I guess he's asking for us to go push our vendors to allow this to do more. Mm-hmm. Or, but one of our buying criteria might be, hey, is this sort of low level integration, discrete API calls available? But I'm just struggling with this one because, let's say that I want to go buy a best of breed firewall that has the feature set I need for the actual root cause of whatever my use case is. But another firewall that doesn't do everything I need has this level of integration available. I think every different company's got to weigh that sort of trade-off. And he mentions automation and he mentions automatically responding to threats and containing threats. And I get that. But at the same time, how do I trust my gear not to have false positives and take an action that blocks production traffic? And then how do I make sure that capability doesn't become a new denial of service avenue for the bad guys to go after, right? So yeah. I get it. Like we can throw a lot of buzzwords like machine learning and AI and automation, but I guess fundamentally, and it depends on the company you're with, I don't know that I trust that we're there or even close to that yet to be accurate enough and without a human in the mix. So I don't know.
And
I'm
even
struggling.
with a human in the mix, it can be problematic.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so I think one of the struggles with this is I think there's a lot of different concepts being thrown into the same pot and mixed together, right? So, I think there's at least three different concepts that he's, at least in my mind, kind of conflating or not doing a great job of separating, at least maybe not conflating, and that is, we have all this data coming in. It's a huge amount of data and it's coming in all kinds of different formats. And so, wouldn't it be great if we could have a standard format like JSON, right? And then we could do cool things like using machine learning and artificial intelligence to parse that out because, we have to get to a point where we can react and we can detect and react much more quickly. And then, the thing that's going to be the enabler for reacting much more quickly is for the tools that are performing the enforcement, again, to be accessible via microservices or some kind of API, so that you can have your T1000 go and and I don't know, terminate the employee when they see the DLP sensor trigger for somebody sending the wrong kind of email. I mean, I guess that's one crazy possibility, but and then the other is, which is I think a very different concept, is aligning kind of the orchestration and the infrastructure of security to be more in line with where IT is going. So kind of putting it into the whole DevOps cycle. Where we are again treating security as code. We're leveraging tools like Chef and Puppet and Ansible and Vagrant and everything else that not only help set up security appliances, but also to make sure that the images that are running our workloads are properly configured and have the tools that we want and blah blah blah.
Yeah, I can see some of that. I've had other conversations on this topic lately about how we take information security engineering and move it into a more, for lack of a better term, agile model. And the tough part is that sometimes, especially when we're dealing with commercial off-the-shelf technology, that initial engineering and initial architecture is not necessarily something you can easily chunk up into, sprints or deliverables or whatever the appropriate terminology is, because I'm not an agile expert. There's a big monolithic chunk of work to get the initial core up and running. And then perhaps you could take an incremental approach on feature set, turn up and go live, next feature, turn up, go live, next feature, turn up and go live. But I'm struggling with it. Let me say this. I don't disagree. This is probably where we're going, and this is where we need to be. I'm having a lot of trouble seeing how we get from where we are now to there with the way that I understand how to build and deploy tools and run tools. I get continuous improvement. I get continually tweaking and updating and assessing and tuning and all that jazz. I see that as a continual run rate where we don't want to just set and forget a tool. I completely agree with that. But I'm having trouble on the initial build understanding how to actually leverage these tools because they're not built for this. They're not. It seems like that framework makes a lot more sense for coding and a lot more sense for app dev work because I can do discrete chunks. I can't really do discrete chunks very well with commercial off-the-shelf technology.
Yeah, but maybe, I mean, in defense of the author, I think what he's saying is we're not going to get there if we don't start banging on our vendors.
And that's fair, right? Start asking for it. I get that. I guess the question is, what if a CISO reads this and starts telling his guys, go deploy this way, and the tools don't do it today? Just make it agile, right?
Right. Yeah, fair. I mean, that's a fair point, but
I may be off topic to what we're talking about here, but
no, it's. I think the net point is in my view, this is a half. This article is sitting half in what we should be doing today, which I think is looking at how to inject security and adopt some of the principles. Again, like leveraging Ansible and Chef and integrating security infrastructure into cloud as it makes sense and on, which there's not a good reason we can't do that today. And then there's the other half, I think, is more of a futuristic, like here's where I think we should be trying to drive the industry to. We're not capable of doing that today. And I don't think if there's a criticism for the article, I don't think I think it's that there isn't a good delineation for, here's where I think we should, kind of couching it as this is forward-looking stuff, right? And
no, that's fair. And I guess my mindset right now is execution, not necessarily thought leadership. So it's enough. Interesting.
Fair enough.
But I definitely see value. I'm having trouble seeing how we cross that chasm, right? To quote a really, really old book.
I understand. But you know what? Again, I think we've talked about this at length in the past. I really think that as at some level, right, in security, we're often part of IT. I mean, it's an offshoot of IT. And we've really got to understand, directionally, where the industry is going, why it's going there, how do we intercept it, how do we support it, how do we leverage it for our purposes. And so I think this is just another. I think this is an attempt to kind of
something to watch and be aware of and try to get in front of.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, again, from a career standpoint, I think we're all better off if we understand this, because again, like, you don't want to be the guy or girl or lady, who's managing the data center, and not recognizing that everything's moving to the cloud, and next thing you know, you're out of a job. You need to stay up with the times. So anyway, moving on to the next story, which also comes from CSO, and the title is "Stop Training Your Employees to Fall for Phishing Attacks."
But Jerry, I train my employees to avoid phishing attacks.
I know. So the point of the article, I would sum it up like this: we generally do a pretty good job of teaching our employees many of the indicators to look for to identify a phish. Things like appealing to authority and driving a sense of urgency, and those kind of common sorts of things. But what the author here points out is, well, those are the very things that actually happen in the normal course of business. And so, when we train our employees, we're creating this kind of bit of confusion, because we're saying, on the one hand, this is how you identify something that is, likely to be malicious. But at the same time, is in the author points out, an anecdote, don't know if it's contrived or not, right? But an anecdote that, they got an email, it was super urgent, and it asked for them to open up a spreadsheet or an attachment and whatnot. And so they assumed that it was malicious because it hit all of those indicators we drill into our people, and it was real. It was legitimate.
It's almost like the bad guys are trying to figure out how to emulate things that we do in the real world.
Correct. And so they, the author here gives a couple of recommendations, and I actually have some problems with this. And then I have a couple of other thoughts too. I actually think this is a really big, just fundamental problem that I don't think we have a great solution to. So they,
this is, the whole thing is, this is a psychological manipulation, right? The whole point is, I'm trying to get you to do something I want you to do based on what your job requirements are.
Correct.
So,
but I do think we shoot ourselves in the foot in it, but I'm not sure that we have a great out. So some of the recommendations by this author here is to give your employees a forewarning of what emails to expect.
So a bad guy could do the same.
Correct. And we've actually talked about some of the...
We've seen that.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've talked about some of the scams where where bad guy has, prior to actually, sending the payload, has, let the person know that, oh, you're going to receive a call, or you're going to receive an attachment, and it's important that you open it. So not sure that's that's a great idea. And, they do point out that you should be sending emails from your own domain, and which makes good sense. But by the way, in the new world where everything is a software as a service, you have outsourced HR, and your CRM is outsourced, and everything is outsourced. It's becoming less and less and less realistic to expect it.
I see a lot of organizations auto tag an email that's coming from an outside domain.
Right.
Like, they might put external or caution or whatever, either in the subject line, in the top of the body, whatever. This starts to become an issue exactly on the point. If half of my services are outsourced, even if they're spoofing my potential source domain, most of them don't. Anyway, now they're getting caught up in this labeling and confusing employees even more.
That's super helpful.
Yeah.
So then they point out that you should keep calm, right? So basically drop the sense of urgency in your emails, but realistically, again, I don't see that as feasible. I mean, most things in business are an emergency, and the author points out that we all, we're all responsible adults, but we're all responsible adults that have too much to do, and
people only respond to my emails when I make them high urgency, write urgent 4 times in the subject line, and then beg them on the internal chat system. That's the only way I get any responses.
Action required in the subject.
Right.
And, yep. And then and then favor security conscious products. So you should be digitally signing your emails because that goes really well with employees.
Hey, we should teach everybody to use PGP. How's that sound?
I think that's a great idea. Keep your emails simple and use text formatting. Don't use HTML.
That's not going to happen.
So I don't know if that person's ever dealt with a marketing department or not. So anyway, I'm not sure those are great. I mean, I think they are actually not terrible suggestions. I just don't think they're very feasible in the current working world. There were a couple of other things that I was, aware of as big problems. So one example that I'm aware of, a particular organization had a pretty dramatic sense of accomplishment in terms of reducing their phishing, their susceptibility to phishing. So they had hired one of the phishing awareness companies to come in and do regular routine phishing assessments, and they did a baseline over a certain period of time. And then they did 2 things at the same time, which probably weren't the best idea. They deployed an awareness training campaign on what to look for, and they implemented, I think it was Proofpoint, one of those, phishing,
anti-phishing
technologies, right? And it was one of the ones that, I don't know if that was Proofpoint, was one of the ones that rewrote the URL, right? So rather than when you would hover over a link in an email, rather than actually seeing the link, you would see a rewritten link that would first bounce off the provider's system, so that it could, eventually, if it was found to be malicious, you would have a chance to block it on subsequent attempts to visit it. But what ended up happening, or at least the thing I pointed out was, is it, because after a while, the phishing attempts, or the phishing tests were much less successful, right? The amount of phishing went dramatically down, or the amount of people clicking on these phishing tests went dramatically down. And my question was, and I didn't really ever get a good answer. My question was, is it because of the training, or is it because that if they hover over a link in the phishing test email, they actually see a link, and if they hover over a link in any other email, they get this rewritten link, and so it becomes super obvious at that point which emails are from your phishing test provider.
So they're basically being taught to the test.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so when you say, rewritten emails, so for those who don't know, some of these technologies will take a look at any URLs in an inbound email and rewrite them to their, so basically their sandbox or their safe environment, with the concept being that it'll proxy through or evaluate or keep you away from dangerous stuff. So yeah, if you get an email, URL to CNN.com, it may look like, picking on Proofpoint, whatever Proofpoint's URL redirect domain is, gobbledygook, nothing like CNN.com. And then that's a processed domain, whereas the phishing test might be whitelisted from that rewrite.
Exactly.
And so, so really, you're just teaching people to, to find the tests.
Exactly. And then, there was I think it was a Twitter debate I saw maybe a week or so ago. And it got me to thinking, and I don't have a good.
Wait.
I know.
People don't debate things on. What are you talking about?
That's crazy, right? In one of the points was just thinking about those phishing tests. The metric is when they click, right? But is that really the right metric to be judging? Is it that you should be testing whether or not they'll be tricked into entering their credentials, or they'll be tricked into opening an attachment?
Right.
So
and the follow-on is, were your defenses capable of stopping whatever it was that attachment or link malware tried to do, if it wasn't just a credential harvest or whatever?
Right.
There's multiple layers here. Now, certainly we don't want people to click to begin with, but my personal opinion is you're never going to stop that entirely. So what's your backstop to protect people from falling for a psychological attack? They're being targeted, right? They're victims of a psychological attack. How can we help them?
Right.
And, that's how I look at phishing defense. So I'm not dogging on training. I know too much about, sorry, that sounded really arrogant, but I've just seen too much about how people react under stress and under different circumstances and different times of the day. We're never going to get to a zero click rate on phishing, ever, in my opinion. So we can't just rely simply on training and education and then shame our users when they fall for a sophisticated psychological attack. That doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, agreed. All right. So moving on. I mean, that, by the way, I suspect in 10 years we'll be continuing to talk about that debate. So
you think the show's going to be around in 10 years? That's
maybe not us, but be other people. So I'm not sure I'm going to live that long, to be honest. So moving on. Next one comes from bankinfosecurity.com. Title is Cryptojacking Displaces Ransomware as Top Malware Threat.
This one was interesting, I thought. I mean, not that the others aren't, but this definitely I thought interesting.
Yeah. So basically the findings here, I think this was from McAfee, was that in just by contrast, in the fourth quarter of last year, there were, I think, 400,000 malware samples that were crypto miners. And in the first quarter of 2018, so one quarter later, there were 2.5 million. And so they interview a couple different security researchers, and everybody's basically pointing out that while ransomware isn't dead, it's the industry, or the criminals seem to be latching on to mining as for whatever reason, is a more profitable or more appealing payload to deliver to computers rather than ransomware. And I can assume that possibly it's because ransomware, at least with any given customer or victim, I should say, is a one-time, more or less, a one-time thing. And whereas if you can get your crypto miner running in an environment, it's not being detected, it could run for a long time, conceivably.
Yeah, it's less impactful to the victims. They may not even know it's there. Gives the bad guys the ability to dwell much longer and directly generate revenue.
Right.
Without having to interact. Think of the customer service savings. They don't have to maintain call centers anymore. That's handy. It's going to put a lot of people out of business, though, who maintain those call centers. But, here's the other interesting thing. It has, because it's less impactful, I'm wondering if there's going to be less of an effort to stop it. Less money spent on it, less technology built around it, less concern, because it's not interrupting business as much.
I actually think you are on a really important point, because I think miners are going to be treated much more like just unwanted software.
Yeah, because it's sucking up CPU time.
Right.
It's not, but it's not stopping somebody from, it's not locking you out of your files, which becomes an emergency.
Right.
This is a nuisance
Right.
to most users.
Yeah, absolutely. So, they point out basically this, all the same protections come into play in order to protect yourself. But again, I got to believe, from the perspective of a just think about it from the perspective of a blue team, right? Now, let's just discount the whole possibility that attack techniques or the payloads are going to change over time, and so we could be right back to ransomware and or something even worse. The economics change pretty dramatically in terms of how much your company might be willing to spend to defend against a crypto mining attack.
Right. Yeah.
It may be palatable, by the way, just to say, you know what? Our response is when somebody complains, we'll go dispatch a help desk person and they'll run Malwarebytes, and clean it off, and then everybody goes about their day. And whereas I think with ransomware, we're collectively freaking out and trying to figure out what kinds of things can we do to hard stop this stuff from happening. And we got to worry about backups and can we restore fast enough, and are the backups work, and on and on and on, and because the potential damage to a company in a ransomware attack is just intuitively much, much worse than in a crypto mining attack. But from the perspective of the criminals, it may not be any less profitable. I don't know. I mean, that's one thing I've not actually seen is what the economics look like for the.
Yeah, that is a very good question. I would think. Wow, that's a tough question. Part of me thinks that if you can get crypto mining gear out there and let it run, you've got a better steady stream of income. But that is a very interesting question, because what's the success rate on a payout for ransomware versus how much can I generate per host running my crypto miner over time? I don't know. That's a good question. You know what? There's probably some PhD candidate papers in there.
It does seem like something that warrants some further research. So anyhow, I would say, like I mentioned before, right? This is potentially just a passing fad, and it is entirely likely that we'll be right back to ransomware or maybe something even worse. So I'm not at all a proponent for us collectively dropping our the sense of urgency around this, but
right. And ransomware is still a huge issue. We're just seeing this start to edge it out a little bit. Doesn't mean that ransomware is going away at all.
Correct. Yeah, and we've talked about quite a few significant organizations like the city of Atlanta here, right in our backyard, had a big ransomware problem earlier. So, anyway, moving on to the last story. This was pretty big news. I guess about a week and a half ago, and this comes from the Gentoo Linux distributions wiki page. So, Gentoo's GitHub account was compromised for a period of time. And apparently the way it happened was the criminals here were able to effectively guess the password, and there's a really interesting comment, and it's kind of leaves you hanging and wanting more. But the root. I'll just read the root cause, and I'll tell you what I think about that. Root cause: the attacker gained access to a password of an organization administrator. Evidence collected suggests a password scheme where disclosure on one site made it easy to guess passwords for unrelated web pages.
Sure.
So
when you've got an algorithm that is based on a particular web page.
Yeah, exactly.
His password, or her, I don't know, might be ABC123 and then the name of the website.
Right, GitHub or Facebook or LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
So it appears that somebody, the criminals here recognized the email address of one of the administrators, found it apparently in some other data breaches, and saw that there was likely to be an algorithm there, and got lucky. And then they locked out the other administrators for Gentoo. So it was pretty obvious. And I got to say, to Gentoo's credit, they seem to be like amazingly transparent about what happened here. So they have a list of what went wrong, or what went well, what went badly, things they felt like they got lucky on. And one of the things they pointed out was this could have been much, much worse if the attacker had not locked out the other accounts and had just kind of used their use the access to make changes to files. And by the way, they did. So they apparently updated a README file to include some a racist tirade. And then they
because that's effective.
I guess. I mean,
man, my entire view of race relations has changed because I read this README file.
Yeah,
I don't know.
So anyway, and then they edited a number of other the source code for a number of other programs, including systemd, to either remove, do rm-rf/ or rm-rf $home. So it was pretty obvious.
Let's think about that. I mean, it was systemd. So maybe they were trying to save the world.
I had the same thought. Could you really tell the difference? I don't know. Maybe they thought, well, except for the whole racist thing, maybe they thought they were.
I mean, I guess it's conceivable you could be a horrible, terrible racist and want to fix systemd.
I guess that's true. We can't discount that possibility. So anyway, yeah. As far as I can tell, there weren't any other hidden nasties in there. So it's not like as far as I can tell, again, you would end up with malware on your system if you happen to have replicated code off of their GitHub account during that period. But it would have potentially nuked your system. So
it does bring up an interesting question of how can clearly they must have had some pretty good forensics of knowing what was edited and where, but if you didn't, how could you ever trust your source code repository?
Yeah, well, I think they got lucky because they had an offsite. That GitHub was not actually their main repository. They had a separate repository, which was kind of what they viewed as their authoritative repository. GitHub, as they said, they maintained the GitHub repository because they wanted to be where the developers were at, and so I suspect, just for the purposes of free bandwidth and whatever else, right? It's handy to have your code on GitHub, and that so probably lots of people were normally pulling code off of there. I don't really know how many, but yeah, I mean they got lucky, right? If GitHub had been their only
well, hopefully
source,
they would have had an offline backup that was recent.
Correct.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it goes back to, it's good that this particular developer had unique passwords per site, but don't make them guessable by, you're still better off going for a password manager that creates a completely randomized generic password per site that has no correlation with each other, or two-factor. It's and this is why remember when NIST was like, don't bother changing your passwords? This is why I have trouble with that recommendation, because 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, when some third-party password database gets leaked, people reuse passwords all the time.
Yeah.
And this is how, you look for another related leak, you find a correlation of a user, and you may have the information you need to get into a different account on a different site, even if it's not the same password. It's a, password algorithm or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. You know what occurred to me when I was reading this one, there's been all sorts of different password guidance given over the years, and honestly, this actually was password guidance provided. Come up with a standard password, and then append something at the end of it to indicate which site it was. And a lot of us in the security world kind of hypothesized, well, geez, at some points that probably will get used against you. And as far as I know, this is the first time that that's actually happened. But to your point, I think we continue to see, almost on a daily basis, it seems like, different websites having their password databases breached. It's just over and over and over and over again. And it seems very likely that over time, this is going to become pretty easily mineable, where you can see who has, who has a pattern, and then you can guess.
Yeah. Especially as we have more and more concentration of risk at more popular cloud providers.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this has happened or will happen, but think if Facebook's password database leaked. You'd have a third, roughly, potentially, of the world, one instance of their password.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. So, I still think if two-factor isn't an option, I would like to see, and I know this is draconian and people will hate me for saying it, but I would love to see sites issuing you a random password that you have to then put into a database or to a password manager. So you have you don't have an option. I guess you could override it and set your own crappy password, but
you are a monster.
I know.
Monster.
I know. But, it would kind of nudge people into the direction of using a password manager.
So the reality is, we, and a lot of sites, especially, let's say it's an online site for a service that you buy. Let's say it's your bank. Let's say it's, not your company, not your employer, but you're the customer of a service. They have to have this careful balance. If they make their password requirements too difficult, they can lose business. And there's a balance of usability and user experience to safety that they're constantly trying to figure out. And so we criticize all these companies for really poor password policies, but I would guess 75-80% of them are aware of it and have made the conscious choice to have a weak password policy because they fear losing business of too many, especially technically unsophisticated users or customers not being able to handle that.
Well, and candidly, they haven't felt enough pain to change their behavior, right? So, and I think that's, by the way, one of the fundamental problems is that nobody in the chain, not the individual, not any individual website, has an opportunity to feel enough pain to really to drive a behavior change. Right?
So this is why we got to sue the county password inspector.
Well, the point is, I don't think it's going to change because, again, if you think about the companies who've gotten breached, right? They don't really care. It's terrible for them and whatnot, right? But look, they stored the passwords in MD5 without a salt or maybe even clear text, whatever, right? So for them, doesn't really, password complexity is not all that important. For any other entity, any other web services provider, it's the risk is on a particular person, like on an individual's account.
So unlike a credit card number being popped,
Right.
which is liabilities back on the, credit card issuer and whatnot, this is liabilities only to the individual. There's not a concentration of liability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, I think the economics are not set up so that anybody has a strong incentive to actually fix this. That's why I think we are where we're at, and we'll be having this problem for, decades to come, I would imagine. So.
And that's the optimistic part of the show today.
Yeah. Well, I keep getting these pop-up or banner ads, saying, claiming different companies have found a way to eliminate the password, and I think I remember seeing for the first time in maybe 1998.
Right.
And Linux will be, it's going to be the year of Linux on the desktop any time now too. So keep hoping. Anyway, that's my cynical bastard moment for the day. Anyhow, that is all of the stories we had for this show. So thank you very much for listening.
Indeed. Thank you. Hope everybody has a good week. Coming up, we should both be at DerbyCon.
Yes.
I think is our next con we're going to. DEF CON's about to kick off and all the related cons around it. We won't be there, but for those going out to the desert, good luck. Stay hydrated.
Be safe.
Take a shower every day. Get at least 3 hours of sleep every day.
Keep your hands to yourself.
And drink lots of water. Trust me.
Yep. Be kind. There you go.
What radical?
I know.
Any other shout outs you want to make, or
not right now.
Those two people still listening to the end of the show?
Yeah. Thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.